Look, there's gonna be Slipknot jokes in this video. There's like 4 jokes you can make about Iowa, and yeah, it's just gonna happen. Deal with it. Well, hello, it's your friend, Shouldn't Paint So Fast, and we're here with an exquisite Rapido M-420 in Iowa Interstate colors. I gotta say, this is my first Rapido locomotive. I think I've got a couple of their freight cars, and I got like some of their buses and stuff too. But this is my first actual locomotive I've gotten from them, and man, they nailed it. It's gorgeous. I appreciate the fact that we're starting to get more representation of these kind of oddball locomotives like this, and especially that we're getting them in oddball paint schemes like Iowa Interstate. I will admit, I never expected I would ever see one of these in plastic. And there's a few minor details that we'll go over that aren't specific to this exact prototype. But given the fact that this is a niche locomotive, you know, that I can't imagine there's too many Iowa Interstate modelers out there. The fact that we're getting one at all, like, they're gonna get a pass for, like, some very minor things being wrong. And of course, this was an exclusive. Shout out to the homies at Spring Creek Model Trains. For those that don't follow me on Instagram, in addition to obviously modeling Southern Pacific at Santa Fe and the merger that never happened, my other sort of niche area of collecting is Iowa Interstate in the mid-90s. For those that don't know, Iowa Interstate, it's a Class II regional railroad that operates on former Rock Island tracks, roughly in between Chicago and Council Bluffs, Iowa. I grew up near their main line in Joliet, Illinois, near the former Rock Island line that is now owned by Iowa Interstate. And I don't specifically recall seeing these growing up, but I know they were definitely around when I was a kid, and I probably did see one at one point, I just don't remember it. But back in the 90s, shortly after they were founded, I think they had 3 of these, and just an eclectic mix of like rebuilt GP9s and GP7s, and I think they had some other like Alco C420s. Really interesting little railroad to model. And even today still, they're this, you know, little quote-unquote regional railroad that has like GEVOs. It's wild, and definitely an interesting little rabbit hole to go down if you ever want to research an interesting sort of middle American railroad. Oh yeah, and they also imported a couple Chinese steam locomotives. Like, it's Union Pacific and Iowa Interstate are the last railroads in the country that run mainline steam engines. It's just wild. So we will allow ourselves to be negative briefly and talk about the few things that they did get wrong on this. So the 3 or 4 M420s that Iowa Interstate acquired were formerly owned by the Providence and Worcester Railroad. And this model, as far as I can tell, is accurate to how they would have looked on the Providence and Worcester. Particularly, you know, the fact that they're running on AAR trucks as opposed to the later Montreal locomotive work style trucks, and some of the other details are accurate to them. Some things that got changed when they got purchased by Iowa Interstate. They did receive ditch lights mounted under the front anti-climber here. Now, the model does come with ditch lights that the modeler can install. I'm going to choose not to install them because none of the other Iowa Interstate locomotives that I have ditch lights. And I think it would just kind of look odd for one to have one and the others not to. So there's that. But they are available. You can put them on if you wish to, and I'm not going to hold them accountable for that. The other thing is, shortly after these guys arrived, I know specifically 801 received a P5 air horn. As they come from the box, as you can see, this is a K3L. I debated on getting a P5 and just mounting it up there. The issue with that, though, is this decoder doesn't come with sounds for any other horn than a Nathan K3. So it's like, well, okay, if it's going to sound like a K3, it should probably look like a K3. Not the end of the world. I'm sure they did have K3s for a little bit shortly after they were purchased. But at some point, they did receive P5s. Again, given the fact that this is a small production model that, as far as I can tell, is only going to be sold by one hobby store, you know, and it's a derivative of a derivative. I understand, like, the economics of it. I'm not gonna be an old foamer who just screams at them online for getting a small detail wrong. But, you know, if you do purchase one of these, that is something to be aware of. It's not 100% technically right, but again, they're getting a pass because they nailed everything else about it. Hi there, post-production SipSiff here. We're going to start off by taking a look at some reference photos. You can see, here's 801, there's the ditch lights there, that's where they go if you want to install them. Also note the P5 air horn. So the thing about Iowa Interstate is they don't let their locomotives get very dirty. You can see here's some pictures even later on in the, you know, the life of 801 and some of the other M420s. They're in great shape, and even today, like their Gevos are always spotless, and same thing with like their SD38s that they have now. You can tell that the people who work there really take a lot of pride in what they do, and that they're given the resources to keep their locomotives in good shape. So it's going to be a light weathering job. Really, all you can see on the prototypes, you know, there's some mud and dirt that gets kicked up around the trucks and the fuel tank and on the pilot. That's to be expected. There's a little bit of rust on these, I don't know if these are the battery boxes or whatever they are up here on the foot plate. And then obviously, exhaust staining all over the place on the top. They're Alcos, obviously. That's what they do. I'm not going to be trying to recreate any one of these photos exactly. I'm going to be using it more as a guide. You can see these GP11s or whatever in the background are in immaculate shape too. Okay, so first step is we have to do something about that exhaust stack being bright silver. Makes me want to push my fingers into my eyes. Truthfully, I don't even know why model companies even bother painting the exhaust stacks on their locomotives any color except for rust. I mean, I know why, because that's the color it's supposed to be. But, yeah. They very quickly end up getting rusty and corroded just due to the fact that you have high temperature exhaust gases being blown out your exhaust stack, and particularly in the case of Alcos, where the engines are always turbocharged, they don't stay silver for very long. This is a mission model standard rust with a drop of just burnt umber into it to give it this sort of dark, rusty, sort of oxidized color. And then once we do the exhaust soot, it's going to look even darker. So it looks a little light right now for my taste, but once the soot is applied, it's going to look much darker and much more authentic. Another area that always gets rusty on any locomotive, doesn't matter how good you take care of it, are the coupler knuckles. So I'm going to go ahead and paint those too. And I know what you're thinking. Yes, they do make rust-colored couplers, but I am incredibly lazy. So I just end up always painting my knuckles. And then, if I need to replace them at some point, I'll either repaint them or use rust-colored knuckles if I can find them. Next, I'm going to be doing the little bit of rust streaking that there is up by these boxes on the footplate, as well as some fuel staining, just using some AK enamel streaking grime. And in the last video, episode 1 of this series, I talk about why I like using enamels specifically for doing fuel stains. You can go watch that for the full explanation, but TLDR, enamels are petroleum-based, and fuel is petroleum-based. Ergo, the wash acts like fuel will. And again, because I just want to do a little bit of streaking here, thin coat with this oil-based wash will handle that very nicely. Especially on white, because that really stands out. So being a predominantly black model, we run into kind of a challenge with doing mud in that if I just spray pure brown, it's not really going to show unless you just cake it on there. Plus, as you can see from the reference photos, mud in that part of the Midwest isn't usually very brown. It's also kind of gray. So for my mud mixture, I'm using a mixture of Vallejo Model Air Neutral Gray and also Mission Models NATO Brown to sort of give it, you know, this grayish brown color, if I can get the shot in frame. That is going to show up much nicer on the model than it is, you know, if I just sat here spraying pure brown. Now to get the splatter effect, you can see I've been experimenting a little bit. I thinned the paint down to a very thin consistency, almost out of just the thinner itself straight out of the bottle. And I'm shooting at a very low air pressure. You can see how it comes out looking very splattered. Normally this wouldn't be a good thing, but this is one of the effects you can achieve with an airbrush. Don't let anyone ever tell you not to get a double action airbrush, by the way. You can do that with a single action brush, but it's just way easier, you know, having the control, turn the air on, and then slowly start adding paint until you get the splatter effect you want. And then also, like I mentioned, having an inline air regulator is going to make your life a lot easier. And just to demonstrate what it would look like if I'm running at a higher pressure, let's paint up here. Okie doke. Next, I'm going to hit these radiator grills on the back part of the model just with some black panel liner. Obviously, I'm not going to bother doing this on the black parts of the model, just on the red and yellow stripes. There's also a joke about putting smoke on my 420 somewhere in here, and I just can't put it into words. Again, for my exhaust soot, I am using Vallejo Model Air gray blue as opposed to dark black. I went through a full explanation why I did that in the first video, but the TLDR is because it's a lighter shade than the black on the locomotive, it's actually going to show up a lot better on the finished product and also kind of look more like soot as opposed to just black paint. Of course, as we all know, being Alco powered, these things would get absolutely covered in black smoke. I realized too as I was going through the footage, I kept referring to this thing as an Alco. It's obviously made by the Montreal Locomotive Works. I know that. I know someone's probably already commented and shouted at me in the comments below about, it's made in Montreal. I know that. I was referring to the actual Alco engine on the inside of the locomotive. Which actually, at this time, when these were made, they might have been sold off to Fairbanks Morse, ironically enough. I don't know if Alco was still making their own engines when these guys were built. I'm sure someone in the comments knows and is also shouting at me, but yeah, that's what I was referring to. Obviously, this is a Montreal Locomotives Works locomotive. See, I'm going at a very low pressure, just going on the top of the locomotive. There, we'll let that dry for a little bit, and then we might come back later, see how it looks, and we'll go from there. Next, I'm going to be doing a little bit of light streaking and doing some rain marks on the top of the locomotive with the AK weathering pencils. Talked about this in the last video as well. Again, I'm not even really pressing on the model with the pencil. I'm just sort of resting it and just very lightly doing some streaking. And last but not least, you can see on the radiator grills and up on the electrical cabinet where I applied the black panel liner, it kind of dries with this glossy sort of finish. So I'm just going to go over it with a flat satin varnish just to sort of unify the finish with the rest of the model. So just coming in low pressure. Obviously it's going to look wet now, but then hopefully once this dries, it'll be nice and unified with the rest of the locomotive. And there we have it. I'm calling it there. I'm not going to be going over the entire model with any sort of top coat because I actually like the sort of subdued sort of satin finish that the locomotive comes with. It's just the right amount of shine. It looks a lot like they did when they were in service again. Again, big shout out to the folks at Iowa Interstate for always keeping their locomotives looking just spectacular. You know, I guess the moral of this video is to kind of know when not to overdo it. You know, in this case, I think it looks pretty authentic to the photographs. It's a good balance between, you know, my own expression and putting my own mark on the model, but also keeping it looking authentic and not denigrating the incredible work that Rapido has done on putting this model together. So yeah, I'm going to take some glamour shots of it, and then that'll be it. Appreciate y'all watching, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.